Good evening, my name is Amber Smith, and today I'm going to be giving you a speech on learning disability dyslexia. According to the Dyslexic Center of Utah, dyslexia is the most common learning disability, and around 20% of the U.S. population have it. I make up a percentage of that. The learning disability dyslexia has many characteristics that can make getting through school and getting through life very difficult. But with hard work and determination, anything is possible. The author Sanford Singer gives a little bit of history about the learning disability dyslexia in his book, in his medical guide, Dyslexia. Dyslexia was first introduced by a German ophthalmologist, Rudolf Berlin, in the 19th century. His definition of dyslexia was only language symbols, people not being able to understand letters. However, with research and the coming of age, it has been discovered that dyslexia has many characteristics, which include poor word reading, word decoding, oral reading fluency, spelling, memory, and mathematics skills. Now I'm going to give you a little tidbit on how dyslexia affects the brain. According to Shally Shaywitz in her book Overcoming Dyslexia, there are three main areas within the brain where reading takes place. Broca's is active when you vocalize words in your mind. The middle temporal parietal area decodes the sounds of letters and words, and is much less active in people with dyslexia. The rearmost area contains the memories of whole words, and the better someone reads, the more active it becomes. This is where dyslexics find the most problems. They cannot remember things. It is very difficult for them to retain any form of memory. So therefore they have to ingrain things into their minds in order to remember it. It also affects the way they process letters. As you can see here, this is the normal way to spell teapot, but a person with dyslexia has a hard time doing that. Not because they can't read it, but because the letters don't process correctly in their brains due to them lacking these two important areas. So therefore they tend to spell teapot and other words incorrectly, as you can see here. According to Gavin Reed in his book Dyslexia, there are 5 small tests a person must take to identify dyslexia. These include decoding tests. That would be when the tester gives pictures or symbols, and the student must therefore interpret what the pictures or scenarios mean. Word reading tests. That is when they are handed words and must properly pronounce them and read them correctly. Phonological awareness test. That is how they pronounce words and if they're giving the correct phonics. Listening comprehension test. And that is when the instructor will read a story or paragraph, and then they must remember certain specific things from that paragraph. Reading comprehension test. That is when they read a paragraph or short story, and therefore they must remember certain scenarios or things from that story. Once dyslexia is diagnosed, a person's next step is to figure out their learning style and how to live with the disability. Not everyone with dyslexia has the same types of problems. Each person with dyslexia is unique. Therefore, they need a unique system of learning. According to Gavin Reed, there are 5 different ways to learn, for a dyslexic to learn. That's multisensory, and that is where they utilize visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic forms of learning, and they do it simultaneously. That's why I did so well in biology, because you would sit in a classroom, the teacher would give you a visual, and then he would auditorily explain it to you. Then you would go into a lab, and you would get your tactile and kinesthetic forms of learning in there. Overlearning, which is intense repetition of materials they are learning. That is where they have to ingrain the information in their heads repeatedly. Structured, which is where learning goes on top of things. They have to learn with a base and then build upon that base. And then you have sequential, which is cumulative processing of learning, but you find ways to make each task meaningful to the person. And then you also have a creative form of learning, which is therefore they go and they use their creative brains to create their own way of memorizing and learning things. And a person with dyslexia, interesting fact, will usually use 2 or more of these. I use them all. A thing to be aware of with people with dyslexia is emotional disorders. One of the biggest concerns is low self-esteem. People with dyslexia get extremely discouraged very easily because they feel as though they will never be able to accomplish anything. They need a very strong support system around them at all times, encouraging them with each task they attempt to take. If they're still struggling, counseling can be a good idea because depression does seem to affect people with dyslexia. Positive aspects of dyslexia are people with dyslexia are smart in many ways. Dyslexics have excellent thinking skills in areas of concept, reason, imagination, and abstract. This comes from the fact that dyslexics use the right side of their brain, which is the creative thinking. They don't use the left side as often, which is the logical aspect of thinking. People with dyslexia can go on to do amazing things. Many people with dyslexia go on to become actors, authors, teachers. Their creativity opens up many doors for a successful life. An interesting fact is that over 50% of NASA's employees are proven to be dyslexic. Dyslexia affects the way a person learns things, not who the person is. People with dyslexia can find ways to cope with the challenges they face in school and everyday life. And I would just like to leave with this final statement. This is a quote that's really helped me get through. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. And that comes from Albert Einstein, who in fact had dyslexia. And basically what it's saying is that just because people learn differently doesn't mean that they're stupid or that they're not smart. It just means that they're different and don't learn typically like everybody else, but it doesn't mean that it holds them back and they can't accomplish things. Thank you.
7 minutes, 23 seconds. How much were you supposed to do?